Hi, Sean Holyfield, CEO and founder of Secure HR. Want to talk a little bit about the bookends of HR compliance, which is hiring and firing. And this is often where most problems occur. When we go to bring somebody into the organization, if we're not following all the rules that we need to follow as we bring somebody in, and that includes things like the interview, the questions that we ask, the documents that they fill out, the onboarding process, the policies we get them to sign, all the way through getting them into the organization. If we mess that stuff up, that's often where the first problems start. And we'll start there before we get to the tail end, which is letting people go in the event that that has to happen. But one of the things that I have done over the years that's been very successful in hiring, and just to give some context and background, I have owned several companies over the years. The most number of employees I had was just under 200 employees. And we were able to reduce turnover from 40-ish%, which was really high turnover. It's actually 20-something% higher than the average in the US, which I think is about 17%. We were able to reduce it from 40% to 0%, and we stayed at 0% voluntary turnover, which means people didn't quit, for the last 4 years of that company. And the way that we were successfully able to do that was actually through a combination of things that we did. The first was that we really understood the questions that we were allowed to ask and not ask in the interview itself. And some of those rules vary by state, but there are specific questions you cannot ask and specific questions that you probably should ask to protect your organization or company. So we had that list of questions, and we trained our people on that. But we also did a really smart thing, and that's that when we were talking to people, we didn't just dive into the resume and about them and whether they could do the job, which is an important part of any interview, is making sure that the person that you're hiring can do the job that you're hiring them for. But what we were looking for were things like, is this going to be a good culture fit? Is this person going to fit in well within our organization? Is this somebody that is going to come into our organization, look around at the team members, to look at the leaders, and actually really enjoy coming to work every day? And the way that we did that was by sharing with those applicants a little bit about our organization, about our culture, how we operate, the way we do things, so that they had the choice then to look at that and decide, is this a place that I want to call home, or is this not a place I want to call home? And a lot of folks skip that step in the interview process. Don't know why, but they do. And it's really critically important. And it's making sure that the applicant is not only a good fit for your organization, but that your organization is a good fit for them personally. And by doing both of those things, you end up in a much better position. The other thing that we would talk about, which is something that we found to be very successful, and if you find this to be successful, great. If not, you could throw it in the trash, is that we would also talk about what might happen in the future if things don't go well. So for example, let's say we meet with somebody, they're a great fit, they check all the boxes, they're somebody that we want, they look at our organization and they say, hey, your organization is a great fit for me, it sounds like a culture that I really want to be part of. One of the things that we would talk about right up front is that, hey, the fact is that everything goes well in a relationship at work until it doesn't. So if in the future something doesn't go well, let's just agree right now that we're going to part ways as friends. And it's interesting because we would put that out there, not because we planned on firing that person or not because we wanted to let that person go, but because we wanted to get that verbal agreement up front that, hey, if things don't go well, we're going to part ways as friends. And just getting that verbal agreement up front, we found was a very successful way to reduce friction if and when we had to let somebody go. And then when we did have to let somebody go, so now I'm going to jump to the tail end, we would bring up that earlier conversation. We'd say, hey, you may remember in the interview, we mentioned that if things aren't working out, we agreed that we would part ways as friends, and that's what we're going to do today. And it was a great intro into letting somebody go, and it was a way to tie back that exit, getting rid of, terminating, letting the person go conversation with something that we had agreed to earlier. We found that to be a very successful and useful way to do that. I actually got that advice from another executive that I met at a conference, and we used it all the time. So it was a really, really great tool. Talked a little bit about upfront hiring. I'm going to jump to tail end, letting people go. A lot of ways to do this. There's so many different scenarios that I don't really have time here in this short video to get into. And we can do a much longer video on all the things that an organization should do to protect itself in the event that they want to let somebody go, documenting things and performance improvement plans and so forth and so on. But at a very high level, let's just say that there's somebody in your organization that you realize is not a good fit or things aren't working out for whatever reason. It's really important to understand geographically where you're located, because there are specific rules that really dictate how we do this. There's also specific steps that we need to follow, things like when do we need to pay them their last paycheck and so forth and so on. But there's a lot that goes into this process. One of the things that we found to be very successful if we were going to let somebody go is to have a meeting with that person and have two people in the room with that person. And this is really important because if it's just a one-on-one, a lot of times there's not that additional person who's there as a witness to what happened. And then a lot of times it can turn into the employee that's let go says that the conversation went a certain way. The person that let that person go said that the conversation went another way, and there's no other person there to prove that it went one way or another. So having two people in the room when you're going to let somebody go or talk with them is really valuable. We tend to have gender representation. We tend to have female, male in the room because we think that's just a good step to take as you're letting somebody go. You can do that any way you want to, but it's definitely recommended that you have at least two people in the room when you go to let somebody go. And that does a couple things. One, it provides evidence or proof of what the conversation was, meaning that you now have two people that are connected to your organization who were able to listen to and be part of that activity. And they both can, have the same story, which is good if ever there's a question about what was said or what wasn't said, or if there's ever a lawsuit. Say that employee goes to an attorney and says, hey, I was wrongfully terminated and these are the things that were said. By having a second person there, you have that witness. The other thing that's really important is the attorney that employee goes to is going to ask, how were you fired? And if it was just a one-on-one conversation, the attorney now knows that they have a better argument, or they have the ability to use what the employee thought was said, and there's really no proof that it wasn't said, because it's just a they said versus you said, and it's just a 1v1, and the attorney knows that they're in a better position to argue the employee's point of view, because they can't really prove that somebody else was there listening to it. There's not a witness, if you will. If the attorney learns that there were two people in the room and there's now a witness to what happened, the attorney instantly knows, crap, I've got an uphill battle to fight here. It's going to be a lot more difficult for me to just say that what my client says is true. I now have to fight two people who witnessed and heard this thing. So it's really a smart step to have two people in the room when you're letting somebody go. I can get into a lot more advice as to letting people go and all the details of that. But one last point I'll kind of put out there. If you are going to let somebody go, it's really important to make sure that it's for the right reasons and not for illegal reasons. So anything that's tied to discrimination, who the person is, add reasons to fire somebody. I know that in many instances, you'll have an employee that's not a good fit. They may not be a culture fit. They may be somebody who's difficult, or whatever those circumstances may be. And in all of those, I completely understand as an employer, as a company, may be really smart, good reasons for your organization to let the person go, get them off the team. It could be that they're just, really negative, or it could be that they're very difficult to work with, or that they are abrasive in the way that they go about doing their work. And these are all reasons why you may not want them on the team. You're just like, hey, I want this person off the team. In order for me to get to where I want to get, I need people that are aligned and are just like really kind of like working with the organization to contribute to it, right? And they're not just creating friction all the time. But you've got to be really smart about how you let those people go, and don't make the mistake of fabricating or making up reasons that aren't there. And it's just a mistake that's often made. So you have a person, and really the reason you're letting them go is because they're just not a good fit for your culture, or they're difficult to work with, or they're somebody who nobody really loves working with, right? But you can't really point to anything that they're doing wrong in their job. You can't really say, well, they're making mistakes, or that they don't show up to work on time. So What ends up happening is companies sometimes will make up or fabricate reasons why the person needs to go, or they will say things like, hey, you just weren't doing your job. But if the truth is they were doing their job, don't say that, because it's not actually why you're letting them go. It's better just to say, hey, we've decided to part ways as friends. We talked about this in the interview, that if ever in the future it wasn't a good fit, we agreed that we would part ways as friends, and we're going to do that today. And in most states, you don't have to get into all the details as to why you're letting a person go. You can simply communicate that. There's lots of things you can do to protect your organization if you're concerned about that person potentially suing you, exchanging some sort of severance payment for a signed severance agreement, which just simply means that they've agreed that they will accept a payment in exchange for signing a document saying that they won't sue the company. There's lots of things that you can do to protect your company if you're concerned about letting somebody go. But the real important thing here is just don't make things up. Don't fabricate or make up or lie about why you're letting them go, because it will come back and bite you in the butt. I've seen this over and over again, where somebody lets somebody go. They'll say something along the lines of, you just weren't doing your job effectively. And truth be told, they were doing their job effectively. We were letting them go for a different reason. So don't try to find a reason why if there's not an actual reason, or rather, don't tell them that there's a specific reason if there's not a specific reason. Most states are at-will employment, which means you can let somebody go for any reason, and you don't really need to get into it in most cases. It's also really important that you're not letting people go, again, for the wrong reason. It could be that somebody is actually physically older, and because of their age, because of your perception of their age, you feel like they're not doing an effective job because of their age. Well, that's discrimination, and it's illegal. You can't let somebody go or fire somebody because of their age. It may be true that their age influences certain things, but there's got to be another reason why, or you've just got to make sure that that's not the reason why, because it is illegal to let somebody go based on their age. So hopefully some of these tips are helpful on the hiring and firing. I was asked to do a short video on this, less than 15 minutes. I think I've stuck to that. So again, when you're hiring somebody, make sure you set expectations up front. Make sure you're asking the right questions. You're staying legal in the questions that you're allowed to ask and that you get answered. Make sure that it's a good fit for them as well. It's not just a good fit for your organization, and to make sure they understand what that fit looks like. And then if possible, get agreement from them up front that if ever in the future there's a situation where this isn't working out, we all agree that we're going to part ways as friends. And then on the tail end, make sure that if you're letting somebody go, you let them go for the right reasons. You're not letting them go for who they are. You're letting them go for the job, what they're doing or not doing. And that as you let that person go, have somebody with you, have two people in the room as you're letting them go, and just don't get into things that are going to likely upset the person. It never really helps the situation to come in on somebody and talk about a bunch of things that they may not even be aware of. If you've had them on a performance improvement plan, if there's lots of documentation that points to the things that they're not doing right, could be that they're showing up late to work over and over and over again. It could be that they're making mistakes over and over again, and that's all really well documented, and they know it and you know it. Those conversations can include those discussions so long as you can document all that information and they're aware of it. But when you show up to a meeting and you let somebody go and it's a big surprise and they don't know anything and they're super surprised that this is happening, that's often where that person will then leave the organization and find a lawyer to come sue you because they were just like shocked and surprised. So there's a right way to handle exits and there's a wrong way to handle exits. Letting somebody go, separations, terminations, whatever terminology you use to describe that. And the right way is to make sure that the person isn't really shocked or surprised by it where possible, and that if there is a reason why and they know the reason why, and you really want to share it, you can do that. But if there's not a reason why that you can point to specifically, it's best just to not make stuff up. You don't want to fabricate or make up reasons why that don't actually exist. Again, hopefully this is helpful, and thanks for spending time.